Hello and welcome to my studio. In this video I'm going to show you all the steps that I took to make this image. Capturing an image of a relatively light subject on a white background is actually quite difficult to get right. So let me show you all the various bits I've got set up so far. So on this table here I have this white background roll which I've clamped onto this table and I've placed this in such a way as to make a nice gentle arc with no defined horizon line as such. Then I have the subject which is this white vase with a rose in it just to give a spot of colour, and then I have the camera. Now I have a 24-70 zoom lens on the camera and I'll be using that around 50 to 70 millimeter. That will give a good working distance between the subject and the camera. As usual, I have the camera tethered into Capture One software so I can see the results on the big screen almost immediately. Right, so initially I've got this set up just to frame the subject. I'm going to take a test shot with no flash just to see what contamination we're getting with the settings that I have on the camera at the moment. Now the settings I have is a shutter speed of 250th of a second, which is the sync speed for that camera, and I've got the lens wide open at 2.8 with a sensitivity of 100 ISO. So with all that set, I'll just take an image. There we go. And you can see from that that at 2.8 there is a reasonable amount of contamination. But this wouldn't be normally taken at 2.8. The depth of field will be far too small. So I'm going to adjust that to a more reasonable f8. Try that again. Well, yes, we're still getting a little bit of contamination. So I'm going to take that up again to f16, which is 5 stops from 2.8. There we go. No contamination at f16. Okay, so with that little exercise completed, I'm going to put a flash trigger on the top of the camera, like so. And we'll start thinking about where we're going to place the lights. So the first part of the lighting would be to illuminate the background here so that all this is fairly evenly lit, just under full saturation. I'll explain a bit more about that as we go on. In order to achieve that, what I'm going to do is place a couple of flash units, one at each side here, pointing at the background. Now for the background lights, I'm using a Profoto B2 system. This is sadly discontinued now, but has been replaced by the Profoto B10, which has a similar energy level. I'll set another head at the other side. Now this is initially just set at half energy. We'll see how we go. I'll just use the monitor to get the right exposure. Now it's quite important that the heads on here are pointing at the background and not catching the subject at all. So we'll just make sure of that, just twist them round, and it's also important that they're both the same height. Just adjust the other one. There we go, something like that. And with those set and the flash trigger on, I'll just take an image. Okay, that's starting to get there. Now if you watch the little numbers at the top of the screen here, as I move the cursor across the image, those numbers will change, and that number, the grey one on the end here, represents the saturation level. So when it gets to 255, it's fully saturated. And what we actually want is to achieve an exposure which is just under that. If you go over, then what will happen is you'll start to burn the edges of your subject. So I think that's possibly a couple of stops. So let's just add 2 stops of energy to that flash. We'll give it another go. Okay, that's coming up. So we can see from that I'm getting a reading of around 209. So I need to go a little further. Let's add another full stop. We'll take another one. Okay, now it's come up to around about 230, 235. I'll add maybe half a stop to that. Okay, and that's come up now to about 245, 244. Yeah, that's looking about right. Now, importantly, the foreground here isn't lit very well at all, which is what I want. So we're doing this in different zones. So you'll end up with one zone for the background and another zone for the subject itself. So far so good then. Okay, so with that set, the next thing I'm going to do is just change the composition slightly. I think it's a little too wide. I thought that may happen. Let me just wind that in a little. There we are. That's closer to 60 millimeters maybe, something like that at the moment. I'll just take another image just to see what that looks like. Yes, that's better. Okay, so the first zone of lighting, the background, is more or less set. What I want to concentrate on now is lighting up the subject itself. And for that, I'm going to use another flash head. This time I'm going to use a Profoto B1x with a 2 by 2 foot softbox on it, about here somewhere, just to light up the subject. Okay, so I'll bring that in here. Turn that on. Now the whole idea of doing this in zones is so that you've got the most control over your lighting. So in order to make it clear what this is doing, I'm going to actually turn off the background lights. So I'll turn those 2 off on the remote here, and this one is already turned on. It's again just set to an arbitrary energy level of 5. So we'll just take a test, and you can see from that, at that distance, it's going to need possibly another 3 stops. Let's add 3 stops to it. There we go. We'll fire that again. There, that's getting there. Now what you can see in this image is this shadow that we've created from having the light where it is. Now it's quite important to get a shadow because it will actually ground your subject. If everything ends up pure white, then it will just float and just appear to be floating in midair, which is not what you want, or not what I want anyway. Okay, the other thing is, I think where it is, the shadow is a little pronounced. So what I'm going to do is move this in just about as close as I can before it gets into the image, so that I end up with a softer shadow and a softer light. The closer your softbox is to the subject, the softer the light will be. I'm not too sure whether that's actually in the picture or not. Let's just have a little look. No, I think that's just out of the picture, so I'll just give that a test. There, that's not bad. Possibly a little bright, but I think I'll leave that for the time being and just see how that goes. The shadow has got much softer, which is much more of a sort of shadow that I wanted. So with that set, let's turn the background back on and see what the whole thing looks like. Here we go. Okay, that's not bad. It's possibly overall a little bright. I haven't actually burnt anything out yet. I'm still well under my 255, which is good. But this isn't very well defined, and the edges of the vase aren't well defined at all. So another little trick that you can use to increase the edge definition of your subject, especially if it's fairly light in colour and you're going to be working with a white background, is to add a little bit of negative fill, as people call it. And that's basically just a couple of flags. So I'm just going to use these offcuts of card, white on one side, black on the other. And I'm just going to place these in here somewhere just to flag off more of the reflection of the light than the light itself. But you'll see what I mean as I set them. Now, in order to make these stand up, what I'm going to do is fairly simply just clamp them to a couple of pieces of wood. So if I just put the wood at the back of the card here, and then just use some of these cheap clamps, that will then give me something which will stand up. So I'll just do the other one. And I'll place these either side of this main subject, like that. Just check that in the viewfinder. That doesn't look too bad. Let's give that a test. So you should be able to see from that, that is what we had before, and that is what we've got now. So the edge definition of the vase has increased markedly just by adding these two flags. And it's actually taken the exposure down ever so slightly as well. Just where I've placed that has actually caused a shadow just at the bottom here. So I just need to adjust that one. I'm just going to move it a bit further backwards, like that. I think this one's fairly good. We'll just move it a little bit. A very small amount of change to the actual flag will make a huge difference to the image. There we go, that's given me a better shadow on the bottom there. So what I will do is just put a mark on that one, and we'll put a mark on that one, and I can use those two images to import into Photoshop for the next stage, which is what we're going to do right now. So having converted the raw image into a TIFF file and imported them into Photoshop, I have this as my base image, and then I've got this one, which is the one with the flags in. So what I will do is, using this as a base image, I'll add another layer to this to put this on top of it. So with this selected, I'll just select all of that, edit, copy, go back to my base and just go edit, paste, and now this is over the top of the other one. So if I just turn that off, you can see the difference that makes. Now, just to make sure that these are lined up properly, I'm just going to drop the opacity to about 50% and just have a close look at this, just to make sure that everything is exactly in line, which it is, which is good. Okay, take that back up again, like that. I'll just zoom back out again. So what I want to do is use the vase from this image and the background from this image. So I just want to add a layer mask to this layer. So holding down the Alt key on the keyboard, that will hide everything, and then I can just reveal whatever I want from this layer by painting it in with with white. So I'll change the foreground color to white, pick a paintbrush, and you should be able to see, if I just start on here for instance, I'll just put that on there. It just darkens it down ever so slightly, but the main effect will come when we go onto the vase, especially when we'll go onto the edges of the vase. So I'll just paint this quite carefully down here and down here, just like this. Right, now if I zoom in, you can see that has made quite a large difference to the edge here. I just turn that on and off. But it's also brought in a bit of the shadow which I didn't want. This shadow I do want, these shadows I don't want. So what I'm going to do, just go back to my paintbrush for a second, just sort that bit out, there we go. I'm just going to change this back again so that it's painting in black, but I'm going to change the paintbrush for something a little smaller and considerably harder. Like so. There we go. And now what I can do is just go fairly close to the edge of the vase, and there, and just by holding down the Shift key, that will draw a straight line between those 2 points, like that. That's not quite right, so again you can just keep going and keep going closer and closer until you get it right, which is about there. And then I'll just very carefully just go around the very bottom of the vase, like that. There we are. And then the same on the other side. So if I just place that there, and place that there, holding down the Shift key, draws a straight line, and then I can just do the rest with a little bit of freehand. Like that. Then just moving in so I can get this last bit just right at the bottom here. What I want to do is actually do this bit the other way around. So what I'm going to do is just take that into there like that. There we are. And just soften up the brush a bit. And just clean up that edge. Excellent. So if I now zoom out again. There we go. I'll just take that off like that. There we are. And then place them both back on again. And that's our finished picture. So this has still got a bit of a horizon line on this side, but we can get rid of that very shortly. So having made my, my composite, I think the next thing to do would be to just make a stamp of these 2 layers. So I'll just click away from the 2 layers in the layer control box, hold down the Shift key, the Control key, the Alt key, and press the E key, and that will produce this new layer, which is a conglomeration of everything which is underneath it. Now with this I can see that this isn't actually quite white. We left it underneath 255 as a value, if you remember. So if I go to Window up here, I go to Info, that will bring up this information panel, which will actually tell me what the value is at any particular point where the cursor is. So you can see as I move the cursor around here, it's moving around a little bit but you can see that it's not 255, and I want to make it 255. So if I go to Image, Adjustments, go to Levels, and use the Set White Point Picker, which is this one here. Now, wherever I place this, it will then set that as a new white point. So for instance, if I go somewhere close to the flower here, just click that. That has now made that the new white point, and you can see the difference that it's made. If I just turn the preview on and off, that was what we had before. This is what we've got now. And you can also see in the information that that has now turned that to pure white. Okay, so that's good. We like that. So OK that. But we're still dropping off towards the edges a little bit in both directions, and the whole thing does need cleaning up a bit because we've got these little bits on the sides there. So again, there's lots of different ways to do this, but what I prefer to do is just to add a complete new layer, then reset the black and white by clicking on the little black and white square here, changing to white as the active colour, using a paintbrush in the new layer that I've created, and literally just paint white. I want a bigger brush, which will give me a much softer edge. There we go. And I will just paint that in, like so, and this corner as well. And this bit just on the end. Now I do need to be quite careful that I don't get rid of the shadow that we've gone to all the trouble of creating. So I'll just go carefully around there, just to preserve the shadow. There we go. And that is now perfectly white everywhere apart from where the shadow is, which is just what we wanted. Okay, so finally, we're just ready for having a crop. I think, yeah, I think square looks pretty good for this sort of thing. Just alter the size ever so slightly. Move that in. I'm just using the lines here just to see how straight the vase is, and that looks okay. So I think something like that. Bring that down a bit. And we'll just click on OK. And there we have my take on white on white. And you see, you've just got enough detail in here to actually show where the edge of the vase is, which is pretty good, I think. Well, I hope you liked seeing that. And it just gives you a bit of an insight into the intricacies that you can employ to make a very good high-key image. Now, if you like watching these sort of things, do click on the other images as they appear, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching.